Hey everyone, Noah Zerby here. This is one of a series of short videos looking at the American political system. In this video, we're going to look at the idea of political culture in general. In a separate video, we'll consider the specific features of American political culture. So let's start with this idea of political culture. There are several definitions of the concept that have been offered. Gabriel Almond originated the term in 1956 and defined it as the particular pattern of orientations towards political actions in which every political system is embedded. Lucian Pye later defined the concept as the set of attitudes, beliefs, and sentiments which give order and meaning to a political process and which provide the underlying assumptions and rules that govern behavior in the political system. And Maria Eugenia Vasquez Samadetti defined political culture as the set of discourses and symbolic practices by means of which both individuals and groups articulate their relationship to power, elaborate their political demands, and put them at stake. The common features that emerge from these definitions center on the shared set of norms, values, and beliefs shared by a people about their polity. Thus, while every country has a political culture, every political culture is unique to that society, and that political culture is a distinct part of society's more general cultural outlook. It's also dynamic in nature, changing and evolving over time. In their work, Almond and Verba identify three aspects or levels of political culture. The first is the systems level, where national identity is expressed and legitimacy of the government is affirmed or withheld. The second is a process level, which includes beliefs and expectations about the role of citizens in governance and beliefs around the scope of political rights. That is to say, it focuses on the expectations of how politics should function and what the relationship between the individual and the political process should be. And the third is the policy level, where beliefs about the role of government and the priorities of governmental action and policy making are articulated. In other words, the policy level encompasses the expectations people have about the government and policy outcomes. At the systems level, feelings of national pride and shared identity are foundational to the success of the political system. In a political system where people do not consider the government to be legitimate, individuals will often resort to political violence or extra-governmental action to solve political disputes. By contrast, in more stable political systems, the legitimacy of the government is maintained and supported by the people even when their preferred political party is not in power. Political disagreements are resolved through the political process, most often through competitive elections. At the policy level, people engage directly with the political system. According to Almond and Verba, individuals will generally fall into one of three categories at the process level. Participants are actively engaged with and involved in the political process. They follow the political news, vote, and perhaps even attend political rallies or protests or donate to political causes. Subjects passively follow political outcomes, but are not actively involved in the process itself. They have knowledge of current political news, but do not regularly participate in politics themselves. And finally, parochials are largely unaware of governmental actions or politics. The exact mix of participants, subjects, and parochials in a given society is often a function of the political system itself. In a democratic political system, for example, we would generally expect to see a greater number of participants, fewer subjects, and still fewer parochials. Whereas in an authoritarian political system like the old Soviet Union, we would expect to see a larger number of subjects and parochials and many fewer participants, reflecting a population that is more disengaged from the political process. Finally, at the policy level, we consider questions about the appropriate role of government and the policy priorities shared across society generally. This is not to say that everyone across society wants the same political outcomes. Rather, this reflects the broadly shared beliefs about political outputs like welfare or security, and the political process itself like rule of law and procedural justice. Now, in the abstract, it might be hard to conceptualize this, but when we consider everything in a comparative perspective, the differences between political cultures and their implications for political processes and outcomes becomes clearer. The annual World Values Survey asks people in 120 countries around the world a series of questions to get insights into the political values and beliefs of each country. The survey is conducted every 5 years and includes a wide variety of questions. In 2022, respondents were asked, most people consider both freedom and equality to be important, but if you had to choose between them, which would you consider more important? Americans tended to emphasize freedom over equality, with around 79% of respondents saying freedom was more important, while only about 22% said equality was more important. About 64% of German respondents said that freedom was more important. But at the other end of the spectrum, only about 35% of respondents in Indonesia said that freedom was more important than equality, and only 34% of Chinese respondents said freedom was more important, while nearly 2/3 said equality was. Similarly, when asked about the trade-off between freedom and security, a similar contrast emerges. Most Americans tend to emphasize freedom over security, with around 70% of Americans saying freedom is more important. German respondents were more equally divided, with about 43% saying freedom was more important, while 53% said security was. At the other end of the spectrum, less than 5% of respondents in Indonesia said that freedom was more important than security, and only about 7% of Chinese respondents said freedom was more important, while nearly 90%, or more than 90%, said that security was. It's not difficult to imagine how these social preferences for greater freedom would lead to a different set of policy outcomes, while social preferences for greater equality or security would lead to a different set of policy outcomes. In the former, we'd expect strong legal protections for civil rights, lower taxes, smaller social welfare programs, and a generally smaller state. In the latter, we'd expect weaker legal protections or more circumscribed civil rights, higher taxes, larger welfare programs, and a generally larger state. And generally, this tends to hold true. I encourage you to check out the World Values Survey on their website, which I'll link to in the video description. You might also want to check out other videos on this topic, but that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.